Hello, everybody. My name is Yuen Ip. I am based in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada, and I'm currently the CEO for the CPA, the Chartered Professional Accountants School of Business, Western School of Business. So the CPA Western School of Business.
Hi, Yuen. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm very happy to have you and to learn more about the work that you're doing. I believe you're the first person, or one of the first people I've had from Canada. So I'm very excited. I pride myself on having so many people from all different parts of the world. And yeah, thank you for making the time. And yeah, let's just go right into it if that's okay with you. So the first question tends to be the kind of biggest one because it's unpacking so much of what led you to where you are right now to the work that you're doing as a CEO and why like within education, why specifically at a business school too. I'm curious to hear like your path and some of the major decisions that you took along the way. So feel free to start however far back as you like to kind of give us a little bit more context as far as like, yeah, why you're doing the work that you're doing.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott, for having me. First of all, I'll just maybe start off very briefly from all the way going back to my roots. I was born in Hong Kong, and when I was 7, our family moved to Spain. So that's where I grew up and spent the next 7 years of my life. I completed my elementary schooling there. Was able to meet lots of great friends, Spaniards. Didn't know anybody else from other races other than Spaniards for those periods. That's when I learned to speak fluently Spanish. Lost the opportunity to learn to write or read Chinese, and so made a lot of good friendships there. So some good experiences, some bad experiences from racism as well at that time. And then when I was 14, my parents, typical Asian, they said, no, you got to go to UK or the US, Australia, Canada to pursue further education because that's where you're gonna get that better future. So yeah, back in 1990, when I was 14, I was sent over to move to Edmonton, Alberta, in Canada, Western Canada. Came in to start my grade 9, and then eventually continue on my high school years, and then completed my education at the University of Alberta with a Bachelor of Computing Science. So basically I started off my career as a programmer at the time, working for a software development company. And then over the next 16, 17 years, I did all kinds of IT roles, anywhere from programmer to technical lead to being a project manager, and then eventually a director and a chief information officer. And during those periods, I was very lucky. I was recruited to work for the accounting profession, the regulatory body in Alberta, and their mandate at the end of the day is to protect the public by educating and preparing and regulating CPAs to be able to serve the public, the companies, and so forth. And yeah, and then over that period as well, at that time, in 2009, I also had the opportunity to work for a university school of medicine and dentistry, where I head up the IT unit, and that was my first formal exposure of working in an educational academic settings, where my mandate was at the end of the day, is how do we use technologies to better teaching and research, and then a small portion of a service where the university medical school was responsible for. Mm, yeah, and then just subsequently to that, I left the university in 2013. Was recruited by a forestry and lumber company to work in British Columbia and based in Vancouver, and that was a great experience because it went from a very academic, slower settings, I might say. The university environment can be a little bit slower sometimes. to a very fast moving environment where you're expected to go bang, 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 and really fast. Everything is due yesterday. And it's all about profitability um, and they try to do it in a sustainable manner, right? Every tree that you cut, you got to plant it, and so that you can create a sustainable forestry in the longer term. And then in 2017, I was recruited back by the accounting regulatory body in Alberta, took on the role of the COO, Chief Operating Officer. And then at that time, I was responsible for the education for the CPA members. So individuals that would have received their destination already, but they need to keep up with their continuous professional development. So that was a different flavor of education. But nonetheless, it was good that we need to figure out ways what was relevant, what did they need, and then really provide timely, relevant education support. Um, yeah, and then just for the last 2.5 years, I took on this role, which is really a subsidiary of our four provincial regulatory bodies here in the West, of the CPA bodies, and they created this entity called the CPA Western School of Business about 23 years ago. And yeah, and then the mandate is really to train and to prepare to certify new chartered professional accountants. Yeah.
Wow. It just sounds like yeah, within your career, you've done so many different ventures and like you've pivoted and you've gone, and worked with, was it like more of like programming or like software design in the early part of your career? And then kind of found yourself into accounting, then going and like working with the regulatory body, right?
Yeah.
As well, for accounting, dentistry, medical school, now business school. And, like it sounds like, yeah, you've seen so much of the landscape, and then found yourself in a role where, yeah, education is now kind of taking more like, is more at the forefront of how you kind of leverage the various skills and, yeah, tools of, I don't know if it's just accounting, but I mean, just other things with finance to really, yeah, create that kind of experience for students, and yeah, I mean CEO as well. I'm just curious, this is a follow-up question kind of like what you're doing right now, but like, what on a normal day, like what are some of the major tasks that you're having to do? Because it's not quite, like from my experience, like being a teacher just in a classroom, but you have many other considerations and responsibilities. So, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
just curious, like
sure.
what's a normal day for you and as a CEO?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think probably the best way to describe it, if I pull retrieve the HPL course, how people learn. You may remember, Scott, how they classify those into the program level, the design level, and then basically the system level, right? The three levels. So I do spend most of my time at the system level, dealing with policies, um, and looking into maybe partnerships, new program development. I'm really intrigued into the middle level, the program level as well, because I think that's where, at the end of the day, the innovations comes in as well. Like, really trying to figure out ways of how we can deliver the program better, and how we can remove barriers for marginalized groups. So yeah, one of the projects that we are really excited right now, and we've been working on this for the last almost 2 years now, is um, we partnered with an Indigenous organization called the Aboriginal Financial Officers Associations of Alberta, and basically we have we've taken a research report of barriers to Indigenous people to becoming CPAs in accounting. And we are basically taking each and every, as many of the sort of the barriers, and then we're mitigating those. But in a nutshell, it's really basically become developing a new Indigenized CPA program, so that we can see more Indigenous people become CPAs in the long term. So that's an extremely interesting project that I've been spending a lot of my time. But other than that, it's a lot of it is dealing with strategies, risk management, working with the CFO to make sure we're doing well financially and we're not going on deficit, developing partnerships, stay on top of government policies that may impact the school, and how to forge new ways to enhance the learning outcomes for different demographics.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, it's fascinating and extremely exciting, especially about the work that you're doing to partner with this Aboriginal entity organization, and the kind of like impact that that will have for generations of peoples who previously had various barriers and set in place. And to be able to, yeah, see a new kind of like influx of students, bringing their background experience and who they represent and what they can contribute to that particular area. I think that sounds great, and I'm sure that many other educational institutions they will be taking note of the work that you're doing. So not only is there this like you have this eye for innovation, but I'm sure that it's also one of like pioneering of like let's try this, let's push this forward and see if we can build momentum for others to follow suit.
Yeah, yeah, Scott, and you raised an excellent point. I mean, I'm learning a lot through this initiative in working with my Indigenous co-lead from the A4A, but he is a member of the Blah tribe, so he is an Indigenous First Nation person, and he has been so gracious in mentoring not only myself but my team, and so learning lots. But from what I've been told, this would be the first program in the world in accounting that does it to this holistic level. Um, yeah, basically we've incorporated content and context into the textbook. It's taught by Indigenous instructors only for Indigenous students only, and the intent is to remove racism, biases, and just that incorporating that whole, what we've learned in the course, right? It's the culturally responsive education in order to help the students see themselves connected to the content, how they can be the lived experiences, the humor reflected into the content and to the ways of teaching, right? So as non-Indigenous people, we've learned a lot from that as well. I mean, accountants tend to be quite serious when it comes with numbers, and when our team and the partners that we work with, heard contacts and requests like, you should include humor into your textbook, and we're like, oh, really? We don't really do humor in accounting, and but it's been fascinating, in terms of using that, and it makes things more interesting, more fun, and that's just how Indigenous people learn, right? They really like to use humor. So, but yeah, just another point as well, just going back to your, kind of sharing that knowledge and increasing your impact, kind of like, beyond um, the the sufferings that Indigenous people have endured over the, centuries, has been just undescribable. It's just even today, like, we hear stories from time to time. You uncover the residential school, unmarked grave site, and the trauma that have endured. So this is something that's not going to be fixed, cannot be fixed in quickly. It's a multifaceted, it's a wicked problem. So if we wanted to do our part, at least in accounting education, to get there as quickly as we can, and it's going to take decades, if not a century. We need to work with others. We need to do this through partnership. So the approach that right now we're taking is we are sharing all the kind of the Indigenous storylines that we've developed with post-secondary institutions in Canada, faculties in accounting, and we'll only be able to support others and share what we've got. And hopefully, we can um, also, leverage the materials from other people and do it collectively. Because that's if we don't do it collectively in a coordinated fashion, it will take us much longer than it should.
Amazing. Well, again, I'm so excited for this this partnership that you're a part of, and yeah, it's like I think equal partnership, right? And that engagement on both sides towards a common goal, and at the same time, right, this reckoning of like what who is our partner, understanding their history and being very open to like learning more about that, and recognizing the significance, like the weight of that shared responsibility over the next, many decades, if not century, until truly, it's evident, like the kind of like the massive work that you guys have accumulated and how that's dispersed and how that's shared and how that's, really elevated in a way that like for Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples, it's not been that case. So the prospects are very exciting, and the way in which you're doing it is, it looks to be like the only and the best way, right? To not rush, but be very decisive and proactive and collective in the thinking. And I like what you shared about how, when it comes to accounting, oftentimes, the perception is it's quite dry because it's number, right? And that's it. But this desire for them to want more humor to be reflected in the storylines or in the way that they even approach teaching it, I think is so wonderful, right? Because they're looking at it and saying this is something that we really value, and so let's add that. Let's make that an asset rather than something to kind of be sidelined, ignored, or thought of as, oh no, that's not going to work. Because, again, you're building something brand new, and that's incredible. So
Mhm.
yeah, I can't wait to hear more developments about this partnership and the programs that you're going to be building together. So I wanted us to kind of maybe kind of wind the clock back a little bit, because what you shared at the very beginning about like where you were born, and then these kind of major life moves to Spain and then to Canada. I find that to be really fascinating, and I haven't had that experience myself, but I would imagine that big perspective shifts happened from moving from one culture that's very different to another, and yet to another. And so, maybe if we can like look at when you were in Spain, you said that while you had a great experience and you learned the language and you integrated and came to really enjoy your experiences there, it was all not it wasn't just oh, roses and everything's wonderful and everyone's happy. You said that you experienced racism there as well. Could you maybe like speak a little bit more about the impact that that had on you, or maybe if there's like a particular kind of like core memory that happened, that if you're willing to share, because I think that that informs so much of like how, everything else, plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Scott, thanks for asking that question. It's yeah, I mean, just no different than for most people, right? A lot of your childhood experiences define sort of who you are, and sort of your tolerance and your perception of things. So yeah, we as a family we moved to to Spain back in 1983. My parents were kind of at that time, concerned about the Hong Kong situation, and because it was soon going to be returned to China, and so yeah, so I mean, kudos to my parents. They were really brave. They sold everything, pack up everything from Hong Kong, and then moved to Spain, opened up a Chinese restaurant, like a lot of the kind of the Chinese immigrants there, and they sent us to school. And but back in the 80s, I mean, I would say that Spain was, you know, they were very close. I'm sure it's a lot more open right now. There's a lot more international people kind of going in, and but at that time they weren't. I was the only Asian in my um, K to 8, so the school. So I definitely stood out from my my skin color and my hair and everything. But yeah, so oftentimes, and this would be a I don't know, like very regular occurrence, like probably monthly. Like it happens all the time. and you walk on the streets and then you hear comments, racist remarks all the time. People like, calling you Chinese and show me some kung fu, and you're like, like I don't, it's like, doesn't mean that, because you're Chinese, you have to know kung fu, right? I didn't know kung fu, and I did terrible in judo. I just stopped at, when at my yellow belt, and but yeah, you get all kinds of remarks like, go back to China, and coming in from Hong Kong, you have a very kind of distinguished culture as well between Hong Kong and China. So you're not at that time we didn't feel like we were exactly Chinese. But anyway, so you get all these sort of stereotype comments, and one time that really stood out to me was I was part of the basketball school team, and we were doing really well. Like, I mean, our team. Now I was in the starting lineup, so we beat the other team really bad, really badly on their end, and their parents were like, just exactly throwing all kinds of racist remarks at me, just because their kids were losing. So, yeah, it's things like that, and then my parents also taught me that, you're not gonna have a future in Spain, because you can't see too many, if any at all, like, too many professionals that are Asians, like doctors and bankers, they're all you see very few people of other colors in professional roles. So very early on, he already said, you gotta go away. You gotta move somewhere else. You're not going to be successful in Spain. So
Wow. Well, okay. So, well, I just want to kind of, validate all that you just said because that's a lot, and how like just difficult that must have been and isolating as well because, being the only Asian kid at a school, you become that kind of like target in a way for, whatever kind of like angst they might be having or whatever perceptions they hear or like read about or see on the TV, right? Of like, yeah, I mean, Asian people do kung fu. So, UN must know kung fu. When clearly that's like, why would you just jump to that assumption, right? And it's terrible that you had to experience those racist remarks, and then especially from the basketball team, where it's basketball, right? Your team was just better, and you were doing better, and yet there was like this, I don't know, this indignation or this kind of like shock that like what this maybe there's like this kind of inferiority superiority as well of like kind of like what they feel like as people from that country that they should be better or something. Probably so many things mixed up with that. But what you said with your parents kind of making a judgment call, which, for the time probably was accurate, right? Saying that, hey, there's no future professionally in Spain, like as a result of that lack of representation, that you don't see, an Asian CEO in Spain, or they didn't happen to see one. Now I would say it's probably different. But that I think that actually ties in with the program that you're doing right now with the Aboriginal Indigenous. It's like it's because of a lack of representation or like visibility, really, within accountants, that they need to have some leader and they need to have some momentum so that they can see that that's a future, that's a viable pathway. And I just wanted to
absolutely,
make that connection of like, wow,
absolutely.
that like from childhood, now you're doing something
Oh,
to
yes,
really
yes.
make it that visibility known, because you understand, from your own experiences, right, with how straining that could be for a young person. Um, and this all comes across as quite negative, but I'm sure there were really positive things too. Would you like just from like the 7 years that you spent in Spain, what would you say is like one value or like or it could be an experience, but like something that you kind of like when you think about Spain, like what's the positive memory that comes to your mind about like maybe an interaction with like a certain person or a certain time in your life where you really appreciated like being in Spain, just to kind of
Yeah,
balance out the negative,
for sure,
comments
for
as well.
sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, people that I knew, people that were close to me, like my friends, they were amazing. They never they never saw me as a Chinese. They saw me as a friend, and I was made equal, and so it felt really nice to be treated like equal and not to be treated like inferior or differently because you know you came in from another country. So you know one very fond memory that I have, and this is a pattern, you know, that I've saw quite a number of times. I probably maybe counted maybe I don't know maybe five or six friends that they 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 often invited me to their home for lunch. Um, and and so the you know because the way how the Spanish school system works, at least at that time, is you go to school from 9 to 12, and then you get a break from 12 to 3. It's kind of funny, you know, and so everybody goes home, you know, have their lunches and maybe takes their nap, and then you go back at 3 o'clock, and then you go back for another 2 hours. So it's kind of interesting. Why not just kind of do it straight? So during those 3 hours, you know, like oftentimes I would actually hang around with my friends, and then they would invite me to their home for lunch. And it was like, you know, you really eat like, you know, like local home Spanish meals. And one time, one of my friends even invited me on a long weekend to his village, like a very traditional village, kind of like the ones that you see in the movies, like the Italian village, and the you know the houses are like few hundreds years old. And so he invited me, his parents, I guess, invited me to spend a weekend with their grandparents, with his grandparents. And so that was a very cool experience. It's like, you know, again, just being open, welcome, and then just be treated equal, and really enjoying their hospitality, their culture, their food.
That's beautiful. I just like how right from the get-go you just started with like friendship. And by getting to know them, being invited over, they really saw you not as that one Asian kid, right? But that you were just Yuen. You were friend. They felt comfortable enough to have you, just join them. And that's like the family side of things, right? The kind of like the inner workings, like, oh, this is our special, space. And I'm so glad that you had that experience, right? Because in some cases, right, people who are living in a very different culture, maybe they they don't experience that, and they kind of walk away from it feeling just like everything was just kind of against them.
Mhm.
And and I think that probably leaves you with a more positive feeling of Spain than negative. And there is a way to hold both of those emotions, at the same time, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you raised a very good point, Scott. You know, there's the divert. I mean, the world is made up of good people and bad people. It's made up of people that embraces diversity. It's made up of people who are unfortunately more racist. So, and highly likely, you know, as humans, we're going to be coming across, you know, a balance of those. And so, how do we sort of take those, and how do we make sure that we learn from good people, but we also learn not to the examples of the bad people not to do those things as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So many different kinds of people out there. But ultimately we are able to like make that decision, I think, in terms of like what which side do we like find ourselves on, of like understanding that like, yeah, I have a little bit more hope for the kind of, I don't know, the humanity, the positive, feelings of like what comes with like friendship and, really being there for others, rather than just kind of going the other direction of like more like pessimism, cynicism, right? Like,
Mhm.
oof, there's no hope.
Yeah,
Um, so,
absolutely.
so yeah, so I mean, those are really core, formative years of your life. And so, now like looking at what you've been able to do, right, with your education in Alberta, in computer science, and then really kind of this, yeah, very fascinating kind of like, progression of like building your experiences in like software program management. Was that it, right? Or
Project manager.
project management, and then with accounting, then looking into higher ed. But there does seem to be like this through line of maybe like what do like the finance or like the numbers, like like how do we understand that in different contexts and for different purposes?
Hmm.
And I'm just curious, like how like someone with like your career background and for the wider perception, right, including myself, thinking numbers are kind of boring, right? Could you maybe like enlighten us as far as like well actually like what kind of stories have you been able to like tell using numbers, and if there's any way that you can kind of like bring in this concept of like global citizenship, like is there any role that this concept plays with the power that numbers bring?
Sure. Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, as accountants, we're kind of shifting our and some of my colleagues, and this is going to be one of those that some of my colleagues in the CPA professional may agree, some of them may not agree. But I think we recognize that the world is changing ever faster. And it's becoming much more globalized, it's becoming much more disrupted. Back in the days, I remember 2 years ago, like, when the pandemic hit us, we were talking about like, how traditionally, you could come up with you can, you can envision that, like major crisis maybe once in a while. Now it's becoming much more often. Wildfires, pandemic, health related, economic crisis. So I think the one view is that the world is becoming changing faster. It's becoming much more disruptive. Whereas in the past, maybe they happen one at a time. Now potentially you could have several disruptors happening at the same time. And so what does that mean in the economic world, in the financial world? And then there's also an increasing sort of prioritization on the need to become, you may have heard the acronym ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance reporting, and just um, because there's a greater need to um, value that the impacts of a company is not just purely for profitability, and in the case of not-for-profits, um, just, just fulfilling its mission, but there's actually whatever we do is actually could have an impact into the global economic, global system, environmentally, socially, and how do we make sure that we have a good governance structure to support those two and the mission of the organization. So overall, kind of tying it back, like accountants are now asked to be more than just numbers. They need to be able to um, use the numbers to help tell the story of the company, how the company is performing, not just not just financially, but also your environmental and your social contributions and obligations. Because there's more and more investors, like people like you and I, who are prioritizing, the need to be creating a much more equitable and sustainable future. We want to be investing in companies that are responsible in those areas. And so now the companies are now, okay, now are even more motivated, right, to demonstrate that they are responsible for it, but they have to be able to quantify those. So that's kind of where the accountants have traditionally been very strong at in terms of measuring, analyzing things, and then reporting, not just financially, but also in the areas of ESG in order to be able to tell that story.
That's an excellent answer. I feel like you really brought in so much of like the not just the financial, like the importance that finance and like understanding those metrics are for accounting, but that the world is changing and now we have social and environmental factors that are really pressing, and people really care about that. And it's shifting companies to also think differently and operate differently. And accountants are in many ways just kind of strapped to the same train, and they have to, either continue going at that speed in that direction, or, get off, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and I think, accountants are not the only ones who feel that, you know, sudden, change, and the way in which it's been done previously. I think a lot of industries probably would be feeling similar in terms of like these pressures to really be mindful and more aware of like what's really, at stake when it comes to like, yeah, just being on this planet, sharing this planet with very finite resources, and then the ongoing sense that, globalization has in effect shrunk this world in terms of like how we can see what's happening in very far away places, and how we communicate with each other as well. So yeah, like, this it's clear that you all have more and more considerations when it comes to dealing with crises, or not just reacting to a crisis that happens, but also being proactive. I think in the project that you're doing, with the Aboriginal peoples, and building this new CPA. Is it a CPA program, like
It,
for them to
it's
become certified public accountants?
Yeah, well, in Canada we call it Chartered Professional Accountants, but it's essentially the same idea. Yeah, CPAs,
Oh,
exactly.
okay. Yeah. So it seems as if it's not just, reactive, but you're also being very proactive to saying this is what is needed, and this is what will be a, net positive on the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like thinking about this concept of like a changing world, and then the people, the students that you're preparing for these new professions. Um, Within this particular program that you're, putting a lot of time and effort, and you're very passionate about, would you say that the concept of global citizenship comes up, within the kind of interactions, or the structuring of the curriculum, or is there a humor side that you can, play to that as
Yeah.
well? I'm just curious.
Yeah, for sure. It's I think fundamentally, there's just so much we can learn from Indigenous people and the culture, and it's unfortunately that through the residential schooling, some of the Indigenous people have lost that connections to the roots, because in the residential school they were not allowed to speak the native language. They were forced to use different names, and anyway, but if we go back sort of the the kind of the historical, the foundational value system of Indigenous people, they actually highly respect and care about the land. So when it comes to people who care about the environment, Indigenous people should be the ones that come out the first, because they've always respected the land as the source of life. Fishing and hunting, and you take care of the land will take care of you. That kind of a concept, right? Um, so, while our contributions may be, as a non-Indigenous CPA body, maybe more indirectly, but fundamentally, we believe that if we can have more Indigenous CPAs that have more like a higher business knowledge and accounting and finance knowledge, that will equip the Indigenous communities to protect the values. And unfortunately, I mean, I must say that even to this day, the Canadian government, it's still there's a level of um, um, paternalism, maybe if that's the right word, whereby the government knows better and Indigenous people know less, and therefore we have to be there to make decisions for you. So that lack of self-determination, it really hurts. So if we can do a better job in terms of equipping them with knowledge and expertise, they can become more CPAs. They can serve their communities and determine the best interest. I truly believe that Indigenous people will be able to teach us and do so much better in terms of treating our environment.
Yeah, and I think this line of thought and like the relationship to land, this understanding of another concept would be like planetary stewardship, right? How they are there to serve not only their peoples and their communities, but also the land that helps sustain and nourish their peoples and communities. I think that connection is so important, and yeah, I've also heard about and read about that those core values of the indigenous peoples and how absolutely terrible it is that the this dark history within just the North Americas, right? Because also in the U.S. they also had their reservations and like other forms of just kind of cultural genocide that played out. But it's just terrible how like it's exactly what we need in this moment, right? To be able to reclaim that because of the path that the kind of global, more capitalistic, structures are kind of making it so that we're not wanting to value it as much. So, I think this notion of like you take care of the land and the land will take care of you. It also, I think, would be valid to say that if you take care of another person, that person will also take care of you. And so this notion of like land or person, I think it's kind of it's so tightly bound together that I think it demands a new kind of conception of like what are our relations, and then how is this community that we have really like interconnected. And that's
Exactly.
something that I really, and again, I'm sure that like within, like indigenous kind of like mythology and like their spiritual beliefs, I think that there is an element, I could be wrong, of like kind of interconnectedness of like a kind of common source. And I feel with global citizenship, at least in the way that I understand it, that's also a major driver of like how can we get back to that kind of like um, you know, core knowledge, that like this is a shared effort, and it's not to kind of like create divisions between like them or us and like all of that. So, um,
Yeah, yeah. I think what you describe, like you take care of the people, you take care of the land, and then the land of the people will take care of you. It's really embodying the principle of reciprocity, right? That we're all interconnected, and it's about sharing. It's about sharing the knowledge. It's about sharing the resources and yeah, I think that's again, there's just so many things that we can learn from Indigenous people rather than the traditional thinking that they're inferior, that we as the non-Indigenous or the white people or the other cultures, we're there to teach them, right? So
Yeah. So, now I want to ask a question that kind of more squarely, put to you, about as in this current role that you're playing as a CEO, many people look to you as far as, what kind of leadership, what direction we're going, even just like, I'm sure your conduct, how you carry yourself, the way in which you speak about this partnership and allow your actions to really back up your words. I'm just curious, like, do you see yourself as a global citizen? And if so, like, what kind of I don't know, like ideas or values or actions do you do as a CEO that kind of aligns with your own conception of global citizenship?
yeah, I think it's actions always speaks louder than words. I mean, you can say for, as leaders, if you say something and then you do something else, then that it does not demonstrate integrity, right? So I think it's about really putting your actions to where your words are, and really putting in the effort. So I mean, as a leader, I'm a fairly hands-on leader. Like sorry, I said maybe the better word would be a grassroots leader. So I love to be in kind of in the front line and sort of interacting and being rolling up the sleeves and then helping with generation of ideas. Yeah, a few weeks ago, my colleague at the AFOA Alberta, he invited me to teach in his organization's intro accounting course. So I had the honor and the pleasure to do that for 3.5 days. I was pretty much teaching what we were learning at our course to a group of about 30 adult Indigenous learners. And to me, it was a great learning experiences to be able to interact and learn about their culture. Um, so yeah, and then just I think I mean personally, I also support the the a local food bank. I serve in the board, helping with minimize hunger in the community, and I'm also serving in the audit and risk committee for a it's called Dr. Peter Center, and it's there to minimize harm reductions in terms of drug overuse, overdoses. So again, I think it's about, putting in your effort, your actions to your words, and helping serve other communities, other marginalized groups, especially, and how we can help remove or minimize those barriers so that everybody can be successful.
It's amazing. And I'm just so impressed with all these various communities that you are part of and that you serve, that really contribute your skills and your knowledge and just your time and effort. The local food bank, like that's something that, like it really speaks to the kind of like maybe social divisions of like who has access to food, enough food, and like the source of like work in order to like get that drug the audit and risk center that you mentioned as well with like drug related like they're like overdosing like that all of that these are like they're like deeper issues within society and the fact that you are there like putting in your time to like really seek new solutions or to like show that like we need to show up for these people as well. We can't just just pretend like they don't exist. I think that that really aligns with so much of the other projects that you're working on and like the main focus with the Indigenous community. I think just yeah showing up and then making sure that you're consistent with what you're saying is so important. And so that's like with the partnership building the kind of trust that will be sustainable. And then, very, soon in the future, I imagine, yield some great results in the way of CPAs, Indigenous CPAs. So thank you so much, Yuen. We are coming to the very end of our conversation. So it's been such a pleasure, and I didn't realize how talking about accounting could be so much fun and relate to this concept of global citizenship that I find so important. And I'm glad that, you from your childhood experiences are able to like, have this through line, this connection of like, your mission to bring visibility to populations that have been suppressed and actively kind of attacked in their histories and that you are doing what you can to serve your local community. You're just a fantastic human being and I would say a global citizen. So, in the last minute, just really quickly, do you have any like book recommendations or like do you have anything that you would like recommend in terms of like a movie for our listeners? I know it's like just something that like you kind of go back to or that you think is relevant to this
Yeah,
conversation.
I was thinking about that earlier, and very interestingly enough, like I mean, I have an Amazon Prime subscription account here, and I was just a few weeks ago rewatching the movie Dances with Wolves by Kevin Costner. It's an old movie, 1990, and but it was like, oh wow, like I watched it like long time ago, and then now as I rewatched it again, it talks about, I'm not sure if you've seen that movie, but
I have.
you
It's
have,
great.
yeah, and how his interactions with the Lakota people, and but like Kevin is in that movie like exemplifies so many good things that I think it's so many things that it's worth for us to learn. His humility to learn about the Lakota's culture, the language, he's caring for the animals, the wolves and the horse,
Yeah.
and the service, right, that he provides. And I mean, at that time, when I was watching as a kid, I didn't realize all the those indigenous values that came up in the movie, the laughter, the humor, the respect for the elderly, and mutual support. That again, so many things that like I didn't realize that came out in that movie. Now, as I rewatch it again, it's like, oh, geez, like it's a wonderful movie in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, through those interactions, you are forever changed, right? He's
Yes.
no longer the same person. And I think that really speaks to the projects that you're working on, this partnership. And I'm excited to hear more updates about that. So thank you so much, Yuen. I appreciate you. And then do you have like any last like couple words to just sign off, like concluding thoughts? It could be really short, but just wanted to give you the last word.
Just well, first of all, thanks for having me, Scott. And just I think as global citizens, we need to continue to learn, to unlearn, and just to understand that everything we do has an impact in not only in our society but in the world, because we are so interrelated these days.